and gentlemen, welcome to the third session of Recycled Architecture Virtual Talk Series. Last week's session with Nizar Haddad was quite inspiring as we learned a lot about how to build a sustainable house. I'm confident this week's session will be equally interesting. These talks are hosted by the Middle East Innovation Leader and Pioneering Force for Sustainability, BIA, in collaboration with Khazan Park. BIA's ventures range from waste management and renewable energy to sustainable transportation and environmental consultancy. Their new headquarters is set to launch at the end of this year, is an architectural marvel and by far the office of the future that emulates the company's twin-pillared strategy of sustainability and digitalization. This week, we have excellent news. BIA won 2 awards at the Gulf Sustainability and CSR Awards in the category of Waste Management and Best Sustainability Education Initiative. Congratulations on that. Today, we are delighted to talk to Mr. Wael Awar, who founded Waiwai, formerly known as IBDA Design in 2009, after he moved back to the Middle East from Tokyo. With interest in natural phenomena, landscape, and formless diagrams of relations, Wael has a multidisciplinary approach to design and is always looking to challenge conventional processes to push the boundary of design. His projects layer his individual design sensibilities into an architecture of natural light, time, structure, and landscape. In 2019, Waiwai architects were named among the top 17 architects and top 50 influential designers of the year by Nikkei magazine. Also in 2018, recognized by Architectural Record's annual Design Vanguard issue as one of the top 10 emerging firms in the world. In 2017, was included in Architectural Digest top 50 offices in the Middle East. Recently, just I think last year, Waiwai has been shortlisted nominee for the Aga Khan Architecture Award. Now, important notice to our audience, please feel free to ask questions in the comment on BIA's YouTube channel. We are live now, and I will make sure to read them to our speaker. Now, before we delve into our main questions, Wael, tell us a little bit about your journey thus far and what really inspired you to do what you do.
Hello, George. Hello, everyone. Basically, I think you've spoken enough about our credentials, which is always quite humbling to hear. Thank you. And I would like to say that before moving before moving to the E and establishing the firm here, I lived in Tokyo, where I knew also George for many years, and we had the chance to also work together in an architectural firm and design together several projects. So my career started actually in Japan and then moved here to Dubai, where I set up formerly IBDA Design in 2009. And then recently, early this year, we changed the name to Waiwai Design. Just we wanted a rebranding. IBDA was in Arabic means start, and we thought we had already accomplished more than just starting. So it was only reasonable for us to,
Yes, makes sense.
Yeah. Please, yeah, let's go ahead. I'll talk about the projects they speak.
So Wael, tell us, what is your philosophy on the role of recycling in architecture, and how do you apply that in your projects?
Yes, sure. So I'll start, I'll start with a presentation. I'll explain everything. So Waiwai is actually a Japanese word. It's an onomatopoeia, which means the sound of a cheering crowd. So it's actually a sound more than an actual meaning of a word. Then the main question is, why do we need to recycle? What is the reason that has led us to recycle? And, I think it is important to realize that our planet is finite, our resources are finite, and then climate change is real. It is no longer a myth. you know, there were so many arguments trying to disprove climate change or whatever, but today it is a fact that we cannot escape from. And in order to protect our planet and for us to be able to continue to live on this planet, we need to start thinking of sustainability and how we can ensure that we live harmoniously with our planet so that the planet can serve us and live tangentially with us, you know, not us dominating the planet itself. Actually, today I watched a short, interesting video online of Balkrishna Doshi about where he speaks about sustainability, and he says that sustainability is a natural part of the person. It is something from within, not something from without. And then how can the earth be separate from you? So in that sense, sustainability is something from within. We should not see it as something from without or something that is outside of us. I'll move on. Yes.
So do you see recycling means automatically sustainable for you? I mean, where does your practice stand with regards to both?
Sustainability is a much bigger overarching theme than recycling. Recycling is a small integral part of sustainability. But if I will move to explain a bit more about the concrete and cement and how terrible that material is. And then if we say, okay, let's recycle cement, it doesn't make any sense. You know, we have to re-question the material itself and its true essence. And if the material itself is no good, then why recycle it? We should invent a new material. And that is essential, I think, for sustainability. Today, you know, the population is 7 billion, 8 billion. I lost track, honestly. And I know that from now to 2050, the projection is that the population will increase by 2.1 billion. So what does that mean? That means that we will have to build double of what we have today on the earth. We have to double our buildings. Interestingly, Bill and the Gates, Melinda and Bill Gates report in 2019 explained that we have to build the equivalent of one New York City every month over 40 years to have adequate housing to the plus 2.1 billion and the current existing population. This is a tremendous effort of construction that has to be done. And how can it be done without the emission that we have today from the construction industry? Today, the construction industry is responsible for 40% of the pollution that we have. Cement alone is responsible for 8% of CO2 emission in the world. If, you know, cement, we are already in 2020 and we still build in the same methods we were building 70, 80 years ago. Things have not changed. And with the technology in hand, things have to change in order to meet the sustainability and the IPCC requirements that we've pledged to meet in those goals. Otherwise, there will be no planet left for us to enjoy and live on. Cement, as I said before, it's responsible for 8% of the CO2 emission. And, you know, concrete is the second most consumed material on the planet after water. Can you imagine that? That is the second most consumed material.
Wow. Okay.
So today, cement, why is it unsustainable? It is not because of the energy required to produce cement. It is actually a chemistry reaction, a chemical reaction. You have to transform limestone to lime. And in this transformation, there is loss of CO2. And this loss of CO2, the incredible thing about it is that it's 1-to-1 ratio, meaning that 1 ton of cement produces 1 ton of CO2. So to create that, the ratio is 1-to-1, which means that even 1 ton of cement, which you know is probably can construct you a single column, not much, that would need a tree for 40 years to consume that amount of CO2 that's gone into the environment. So if today cement was invented, it would be no one would approve it. It would be a disaster. It would be something that no one could accept to use. But unfortunately, it's just a material that's been around for so many years that the industry has become so powerful that we are unable to change it, even though we know of all the catastrophes that it is impacting on our environment. This is currently under construction in China, the biggest cement structure. So it's not only for architecture. Cement is, used a lot in infrastructure also, as well as things like tile paving, concrete paving in the streets. So it's not only cement, is associated only with buildings, but they're also associated with so many other structures. And actually, only 1/3 of cement is used in architecture or physical buildings. 2/3 are used in infrastructure and other wave breakers, things like that go into the sea and the ocean. Jumping on, so we talked about pollution. The second thing is extraction. So our construction industry is responsible for 40% of material depletion, resource depletion. So we consume from our planet. We're eating up our land as we go, 40% today. If we wait till 2050, what would that projection be? It's unimaginable at that scale. And energy, if you talk about energy, today the construction industry consumes 36% energy of the global energy, 86% of which is non-renewable energy from fossil fuels, which is, we are not even using solar, wind, or any other power. Mostly 86% is from fossil fuels. And then finally to excess, which is waste, we are also responsible for 40% waste. These projections have been studied by, Dr. Philip Bloch at the ETH Zurich, and I saw that in one of his last lectures. And these are things that we have to be very aware of, and we have to ask ourselves, what is our responsibility? What is the responsibility of me as a contemporary architect today in the 21st century, when I see this, this impact that's happening on the environment? I really like this picture because, it shows all the great modern architects sitting together, from Philip Johnson to Arata Isozaki to Remkula, Zaha Hadid, and many others, Peter Eisenman. And you can see, I like to see in this picture how they're all from so many different cultures, so many different backgrounds, yet they all selectively choose to wear the same kind of outfit with very slight variations. For example, you can see with Arata Isozaki, the bow tie, giving a hint of an Asian twist to the situation. But where modernism is kind of unified, there is a uniform language that they adopt, and architecture tends to adopt. And so we say, what is the responsibility of the 21st century architect, but the contemporary architect? But also it's good to look at what the vernacular architecture was about, the no architect, when there was no, and vernacular architecture was about, building from nature. It was the vernacular architecture of the UAE was using the coral blocks that you find from nature, stacking them to create an architecture, where architecture was very contextual. This is something that is very inherent in our design philosophy, in my design philosophy too, that, context is key, culture is key. Those have to be reflected in architecture also. And this is a slide where, it just shows I'm Lebanese, I have Japanese partners in the company. I lived in Japan, and now today I'm in the UAE. So I kind of familiar with all these three cultures. But if I look at women of these three cultures just 100 years ago, they're so diverse. And still today, maybe Lebanon has lost most of that diversity, but still today, the UAE still has a strong sense of identity and tradition. Japan still has a strong sense of identity and tradition. But many parts of the world, unfortunately, has been losing that sense of identity, culture, and tradition. This is a photo, again, in Sharjah, showing the architecture, vernacular architecture built This is a very interesting also project or construction in Siwa. It's on the border of Libya and Egypt, where the whole city of Siwa was built using salt blocks extracted from the local sabkha, which is the salt flat in the area. And I talk a bit about this because I'll talk a little bit about the research that we're doing for the National Pavilion of the UAE for the Venice Biennale 2021. I hope a lot of you get to visit Venice next year and see our exhibition in May, and it will stay up until November. But here you can see they built from their local environment. They built from their ground, Today, we are not saying that we should build from the sabkhas or from the ground or from the environment. It was such a fascinating construction that even Star Wars decided to shoot this film set on a sabkha, and also, with architecture built from the salt blocks of the ground, or the salt flats, the sabkhas of Siwa. But why I talk about that, it's because that was, I talked about cement, I talked about this modern, our responsibility to look towards new materials and start thinking, if we move forward, how can we move forward sustainably in a proper way? And we started trying to see the vernacular of the region just to gain some inspiration. And then we stumbled upon Siwa and started then to look in parallel on the land or the soil of the UAE. What is the soil of the UAE? And we found out that 5% of the land area of the UAE is sabkhas, our salt flats, actually. So that's a natural asset within the geography or the land. Unfortunately, today there's a stereotype image of the UAE just being land of the desert, but actually sabkhas belong to wetlands, and that's actually the title of our exhibition in Venice, which is, it's under the wetland classification. And they are a huge, sabkhas run along the whole coast of the UAE, as well as Liwa and Sabkha Mati on the borders of Saudi Arabia. That's a picture of the sabkha in Liwa. It's very important to note that the UAE sabkha in 2018 was listed on the UNESCO tentative World Heritage sites. It is of that importance. I mean, it's a natural phenomenon that should be preserved and well understood. And we should understand that sabkhas also, they sequester CO2. 1 meter square of sabkha sequesters more CO2 than 1 meter square of rainforest. So these are environments that can help us actually consume and get rid of CO2 in the environment. So they are called carbon sinks or natural sinks. What are other carbon sinks and natural sinks in our environment? Is the sea. The Arabian Sea is a natural sink or a carbon sink. But what's happening to that is important also to understand, that unfortunately, the GCC in general, not only the UAE, has scarce water resources. There are no water. So we need to desalinate. There's nothing wrong with desalination. I don't think there is anything wrong with that. But what I think is wrong is that when you end up with a waste product of desalination, which is a highly salt concentrated brine, and what you do with it is you throw it back into the sea. This is being dumped back into the Arabian Gulf. And when you have all these countries desalinating, I mean, UAE, KSA, Kuwait, desalinating extensively. UAE is the third largest desalinator. First is KSA, second USA, third UAE. And that residual brine is being dumped into the sea. We are threatening the sea. To every day, it's here, every day there's equivalent of 4,800 Olympic swimming being dumped back into the sea. So what does that mean? The MENA region is responsible for 48% of desalination, 52% for the whole rest of the world. And yet we occupy a population of, it doesn't reach 100 million. It doesn't reach 100 million. So for us, the important thing is that then we saw that this desalination waste is probably an industrial waste that we can look at as a material in order to sustainably create an equivalent or a contender to cement, to Portland cement. And this is Marina Tabassum came up with fantastic terminology for what we are doing, and she called it the future vernacular, where, you know, in the past, the vernacular was your geography, your stone, your bamboo, your mud. Today, vernacular is your waste, could be your waste. So this is where, again, it ties into sustainability, it ties into recycling. So we are studying how do we recycle this residual brine that's being dumped back into the sea. And that's the whole actually theme, or the whole research for the UAE National Pavilion in the Venice Biennale. So we begin with extensive experimentation, which is it starts off with simply placing fabrics into highly salt concentrated solutions, which start to crystallize, and then a fabric that works in tension starts to work in compression, and hence creates automatically, you know, an architecture. This is a photo of our laboratory space in As-Serkal. Today we have a new lab space, but we are conducting more experiments. Anyone in the UAE listening or in Dubai or visiting, please come to our laboratory space. It's open to public. We would love to share more of our research with everyone. And we've involved a lot of students in the research, a lot of interns. It's not something that we are doing solely, but actually it's a huge collaboration effort that we are kind of carrying out within the city and beyond the city. Actually, these are more images of the different experiments with the different materials and minerals that we have extracted from the desalination brine, and also that are found in the natural geography of the UAE. We were even able to build a wall from this material. And our main collaborators that I have to mention is NYU Abu Dhabi, the Ammar Lab, which is the Advanced Material Research Laboratories, the American University of Sharjah, as well as the University of Tokyo. We have 2 laboratories in the University of Tokyo under structural and advanced building technologies, working with us on designing the prototype that will be exhibited in Venice. This is a photo at AUS, so you can see it is chemistry more than architecture actually, but it is architecture at the same time. It is really re-questioning the material. This is where you asked me before, how important is it to recycle? I mean, why would we recycle concrete if it's so bad? Of course, if we have it, let's recycle it, but let's find something new. Let's find an alternative, a real alternative, not a nostalgic alternative. These are more interesting photos of our experiments, and these are early experiments which are soluble crystals. So these are experiments without the advanced material laboratories. These are, you know, if it rains on this structure, it will probably collapse. But then we were able to push the research to create insoluble structures, which is equivalent to Portland cement, and that is what will be exhibited in Venice, actually. And here we experiment with also more casting in sand. Again, this is a way of, you know, looking beyond shuttering. You know, when you have to shutter and cast concrete in shuttering, because that's again producing a huge amount of waste to shutter and to that. But why not if we can use sand as molding technology to create these beautiful architecture spaces? That's basically my answer to your first question.
Okay. Actually, it's very, very informative and very interesting, Wael. You mentioned all these materials. Now, if we, when one think about recycling, of course, you know, the first topic comes to one's mind is material. But if we keep materials on a side, can you see a way where architecture itself can be recycled?
Yes. I mean, I'll probably explain here about Heidi 3. I think that's an excellent project that I can, this is a collaboration actually with Ahmed and Rashid also, cultural engineering. And this project is actually a project made from 84 shipping containers, 40-foot high cube shipping containers. And the site was next to Dubai Design District. Everyone's familiar, I believe, with the site, and it's quite a barren site. So at that time, it was quite an open area there, not any asphalted roads, etc. So we needed to create something that's quite strong and sustainable also against that environment. So we looked at, at Dubai and what material can we use that is existent in Dubai, given that the client wanted this project also to be a temporary, not a permanent building structure. So shipping container, again, was a perfect answer. It's a very sustainable solution. I mean, these structures are there. We're recycling them. We took 84, already used containers. I know each container has a tag and has a story. Each one had traveled to many countries in the world probably, and then these come and become assembled to create a space or an architecture. So that's a local material. That could be a future vernacular. This is something that you have in your city. It is something that you should look at as something that is readily available for you to use in order to produce your architecture. Again, as I said in the beginning, we're very interested in context and culture. So we wanted to also create an architecture that is reflective of that and the context. So this is a photo of old Dubai, and you can see how, the walled kind of introverted spaces, and that is a result of the environment. It is not a result of any other intention. Because of the harshness of the desert, you needed to introvert. And our site was the same. It was kind of in an open area. So we laid out the containers in an introverted way and created these gardens in between them where, blurring the boundary. That's another obsession probably of mine is blurring of the boundary between the in and the out. And between architecture and landscape as disciplines, I see them as a single discipline that work hand in hand. It's not something that should have a clear line in between the two disciplines. And then, as you mentioned, that we are interested in diagram of relations, not diagram of form, which means that it's about the activity. How do you create architecture that is about natural wind ventilation, the natural light, and all of, a comfortable space for you to sit in, something that you enjoy, you don't feel bad. And that is also an answer to what is sustainability at the end of the day, And then, stacking these containers to create that kind of environment. Here you can see one of the containers that we actually have more than one that we used as wind towers to naturally ventilate the gardens. We also didn't use any additional reinforcement or structures other than the containers themselves. So it's not like a fake container project. I will not mention other projects in that sense, but where you have a steel or a concrete structure and then you clad it with the wall of the curtain of the container and say this is a container project. No, that is not at all sustainable or recycling in any sense. So these can actually be dismantled and reassembled on any other site within a month, less than a month, because they are built off-site. And then here you can see photos. This was actually as soon as it was built. Here again, you can see we also created outdoor fire pit areas, and this balance between landscape and architecture and the seamlessness between the inside and outside, the continuous connection is very important to us. so that really one can enjoy the space as a whole. And these are more recent photos I took. I added them because the landscape had really picked up in the project. You know, when the project finishes, you take photos, the landscape still kind of picking up. Yeah. You know, it needs a couple of years until it really nurtures, and then you can really feel the power of the space. It just becomes much more vibrant. Okay, this is my answer, George, to that question. I mean,
okay. Great. So a beautiful project, by the way. So a lot of material, you know, a lot of material used in building industry, you know, interior fit outs and urban installations, you know, are all of organic natural substance. You know, to state few: wood, glass, brick. I know you have issues with the concrete. Oh, so I will not mention that. So what are the materials that you used in your architecture, and how these materials affect and define your design process and product?
Yes, sure, of course. Well, actually, I'll present High Creative Hub in Jeddah for this question. I think it really also puts a perspective of how we see architecture and materiality in that essence. And I think it's important, just before I go into the project, the important thing about material is that, you know, the material, after you throw it, or you throw it back into a dump site, or you know, the building is dead, whatever, this material should naturally decompose into the earth, and that's important. Or you should be able to easily desection it and recycle it. These two things are very important. Either or are important. If you cannot do this or that, then I think it is problematic. And this is, you know, this is something that every architect should keep in mind, I believe, when they are selecting materials for the project. So I'll move into High Creative Hub, which is almost complete. I'll show you some pictures, hopefully opening early next year, mid next year in Sharjah in Saudi Arabia for Art Jamil and Community Jamil. So, you know, the project again is in Jeddah. So we looked at the local culture, the local context. I understood the local urban morphology, because it's very similar. Actually, Jeddah is very similar to Dubai in terms of climate. It's probably a little bit more moderate than Dubai, I would say, probably just slightly. It's the Red Sea is maybe a bit cooler than the Gulf, because of the increase of salinity in the Gulf, actually, which traps heat and becomes like this giant battery that we live next to. But and you can see a beautiful picture of 100 years ago. Actually, this is a market in Jeddah, and you can see how people gather outside, you know, around retail stores, buying and discussing and socializing and drinking coffee maybe. And, you know, this will or desire of the people to talk to one another, to hang out with one another, it's, you know, and accumulate in groups. So the site actually is also quite a tabula rasa. Just all, like most of the sites we work with here, they kind of are in a no context kind of situation. But this no context is a context, so it has a very special sense to it. So, you know, so again, we had to introvert. It was important to introvert. You could not really connect to the outside. It is really barren in the area. And again, it's a cultural facility, and there's a residential neighborhood right next to us. So we need to create this kind of respect to that neighborhood, and being introverting just made a lot of sense to us in a way. So, you know, from 100 studies, this is not a one-off. I will not show the whole design process, but through 100 studies, we were convinced at the end that maybe the best design solution for this project is one single courtyard that, you know, brings all these people together, all this creative hub, all this community. And you are forced every morning to all come into this one big space and say good morning before you go into your own private office or your own into your own space. And then that courtyard actually continues on the terraces on the first and second floor through terracing. So for us, it was an extension from the ground up to the first, up to the second level, a continuation of the courtyard space. And then from the outside actually also sets back in to break the scale. It was important to break the scale against the residential neighborhood. One giant wall that, you know, is introverting is just too aggressive. And we thought setting back. And that also allowed us to bring in natural light into all the spaces within without having to open windows to the outside. And this is something you can see soon in the pictures. So this is the building. Actually, it sits in an island site. Around it are 4 roads. And then there's a residential neighborhood to the down. And these sites around it are zoned as residential neighborhoods. So they're eventually going to be built into villas and houses. And here you can see, so finally, what the building looks like is a U structure, actually, that sets back from the outside and from the inside, with an independent structure in the middle that is actually gallery, an exhibition space that is run by Art Jamil throughout the year, while the others are multi-use spaces. There's art galleries, there's a cinema, there's restaurants, cafes, a comedy club. It's a lot, artist studios. It's a very diverse program in that sense. This is the perspective of the courtyard looking up. So you can see how, you know, also the circulation is all extroverted. So you have to walk on the outside, and it's all under this shaded pergola. So we really, you know, kind of try to create a natural environment and allow for natural wind flows and natural light to occupy the spaces rather than artificial light and, you know, artificial MEP and all of that. This is from a different angle looking at the courtyard, but and then these are renderings of the gallery spaces, but I'll show you the build. So this is the build. So this is what you see. So quite the facade we used, and, you know, to keep some commonality with the Jamil Art Center in Dubai, we use the same pearlescent white. So it's not a white. In another picture I'll show, with the movement of the sun, the facade tends to change color. So again, this is, you know, this is a dialogue that we have with the sun. Kind of, the building is in a constant state of motion or change in accordance with the movement of the sun itself. And this is actually today the shaded areas have been installed. So these are a couple of months old, but they give you a hint of the architecture. And then you see all the spaces flooded with natural light that's coming in from the back. Zoom in on the facade. And this is at sunset, where the aluminium starts to change in color to a pearlescent gold kind, and it changes. The color always changes. It's like a pearl kind of situation. So it's an ephemeral building. Actually, the building is all, it's built, it's a steel structure, and it's used pre-rolled. It's not custom-made steel. So this is not, these are off-the-shelf steel beams and columns, etc. So this is an off-the-shelf structure. And this, again, can be dismantled. These sections can go into a different building, put up in a different way, forming a completely different building typology. But also what this structure offers is flexibility. So today, this building is a community center or a high creative hub, not say a multifunctional art center. But it can be transformed to become any other facility that it needs to be. It can become all offices or any other program. And that flexibility is very important. And that also is sustainability, in my opinion. When you have a building that can only serve its program, that's very unsustainable. Because today it is working as this program, but what's going to happen 10 years later when the economy and the population changes and the wants and needs of people change? So that is sustainability at the same time. And that's a section sketch of, actually, this was part, I was telling you the other day, part of the Design Miami shop online, actually, where there was an awareness or a fundraising campaign called Architects for Beirut, where the money goes to AUB laboratory for the study of redeveloping Beirut after the blast. And this was a sketch that we donated, and it's sold already. It was sold online. And here you can see the diagram of relations we talk about. You know, it's not about form. It's really about the relations and how things come together rather than the actual form of the building itself.
I mean, I really liked this bold gesture of, closing from outside and opening to the inside, creating this introverted kind of courtyard. Is actually, even from outside, when you look at the project, is, all is closed, but then inside all is open. And that's beautiful. I think that's a very good, very strong, bold gesture.
Thank you.
From your side, guys.
And I think there's also Al-Warqa Mosque, which can answer this question in a different way. You know, Al-Warqa Mosque in Dubai, this was nominated for the Aga Khan Award in the last cycle. And here, we just, again, the site, Tabula Rasa, in the middle of the desert. When I first visited the site with the client, there were no roads, nothing. It was just all sand, and there were housing coming out around it. But today it's actually all built. There's a lot of roads there, a lot of villas around it. But again, we looked at the neighborhood. We wanted to create a mosque that really ties in with the urban fabric and is a community space, a mosque that is communal rather than iconic, a place where people go to pray and hang out, where they can read a book, they can sit and chat with friends. And this was very important for us in a way that, where the mosque is part of the community. And that is going back into the Arab hypostyle mosque, actually, in history. So if you look at the history, there's 4 typologies of mosques. This is being very zoom out kind of situation. It's not that simple, but I'm, just looking at it as architects, we like to zoom out and zoom in, But looking at the extreme zoom out, there's, the Arab hypostyle to the central Turkish dome and the Persian and the Indian, and each have different, create different results. While the Turkish is really the central, it's very authoritarian kind of iconic. It's not a community space. It's not built for a communal, as a communal gesture. So we wanted that Arab hypostyle, and that simplicity, we thought, is very sustainable and very important also to the environment. So the mosque, actually, all the external stone is yellow Saudi stone. It's it's a local stone that's brought in from Saudi Arabia. It's a sandstone that was bush hammered and installed. I won't go into planning, but here you can see actually the Riwaq wraps around, so there's no boundary wall. It's open to the public. Anyone can walk in anytime from any side of the street. And we proposed to use parabolic arches of different sizes. We have 4 different sizes. Again, the arch didn't need to be a circular arch or a horseshoe arch, because here, the arch was not the arch was structure in the past. Today, it's not structure. So if it was going to be something that's just decorative, then why not it being playful, inviting, these different, it becomes like a music on the facade where it invites people in at interplays. It opens, it closes, it gives you that, that interplay.
Fluidity, yes.
And then here you can see a man walking in from the Riwaq into a sahan with his son, going to pray, and then the haram inside. So you can see all these overlaps, these subtleties from the Riwaq to the sahan to the haram space. And then we wrap the whole Riwaq actually with a GRC that's also of a pattern, an abstracted floral motif that also changes with the sun, movement of the sun. So you have different shadows. It's always kind of this interplay or dialogue with the sun is important for us. It's phenomenal. That's what we are interested really in. And here you can see people hanging out in the shade. You see the beautiful shade under the Riwaq. So they're hanging out, they're talking after they've prayed, they talk for half an hour, they chit chat, and then people walking around in the courtyard. And then all light, actually, I want to talk about natural light because that's very important for us, and that's extremely sustainable. If you can create a space that's fully lit by sun and no artificial lighting, and that space can function for most of the day, I mean, at least 8 to 10 hours without needing to turn your lights on, and that's very sustainable in a way, right? So this actually, in this photo, there's no light. No, this is only the natural sunlight. That's what that's how this space actually works, and that's the future vernacular. That's your asset in Dubai. It's the sun. I mean, this won't work. I will talk about it in probably the second. This won't work in Singapore, where the sun is not there for 80% of the day, it won't work in London. It's, you have clouds all of the day. It's raining. So you have to think of the environment there, the context there, and how can you create architecture there that's in line with the context, in line with its environment in a way. Yes, I think I've answered that, and
okay. So before we go to the question, because we have a lot of questions from the audience, but before we go that, I want to ask you the last question. So state one environmental opportunity and or challenge that you had to face while designing or constructing a project.
That's great, because this I'll try to go really quick so we keep some. Yes. So this we had no client, but we wanted to challenge ourselves. So I decided with Teramosan to sit down, and we said, listen, let's challenge ourselves. If we wanted to create a tower today, how can we create a tower that's different in Dubai from the picture of the modern architects that we showed before, that is equal kind of to this picture here, where you have all these dancing towers from all over the world, yet these can exist everywhere and nowhere and wherever. And how site-specific are they is very questionable, in my opinion. So we took that challenge upon ourselves, and we started looking at the sun and the climate. And again, Dubai, the asset is the sun, or it's not. You shouldn't see it as a negative, but you should see it as a positive. How do you work with that? These are photos I took from our old office, actually, of the light outside. It's always the same, that light. So if we compare Dubai to Tokyo to Berlin, the asset here, we have the sun angle is very high. It's extremely high. So that is also something that we can take advantage of. It's 88 degrees. So which means that your north facade, actually, so we thought a typical tower is actually just an extruded box, right? So your east, west, south, all the same, being exposed to the same heat gain. So then you need to rely on triple glaze and very expensive glass and heavy MEP equipment. While if we just simply tilted the tower towards the south and hid the south facade because of the very high sun angle in Dubai, then you will just expose more of the north facade, and most of the building and the facades will be in shade. Automatically, they will start to shade themselves with that tilt. The problem with that tilt is that when you create it, you cannot put in your vertical shaft. So what we did is just chop it into 3 different volumes, stack them, which added more shade to the facades, and then we could easily introduce the vertical shaft. Then you end up with this form. And this form is not a result, again, it's not a diagram of form, it's a diagram of relations. This is not a form of us wanting to create a gesture because it looks good. No, this is really it's a sustainable process of thinking of the environment, the sun, that yielded this form. And the form is a result of a study that in that sense. And it's a very typical, simple section. If you look at the section, it's a very simple section. We did all the facade studies and studied in detail. This project was part of the World Architecture Festival, the top 6 towers, competing for the top 6 towers in the world, actually, competition. We, not towers, actually offices. Unfortunately, we lost to a very cute office in Vietnam, which had very green. And I thought it's unfair because we're in a tower category. We shouldn't be in an office category where someone can just submit a single story office design. Well, you know, and then you can create variations to that. If it's not an office building, it could be a residential building. You can just extend the slabs that could even create more shade and, you know, all your facades. Basically, yes, this is it. I think it's great. We have 10 minutes.
Yes, we have just 10 minutes, but we have a lot of questions, so I'll try to cut and be very fast. Sure. So I apologize for the people who wrote all the comments. I'll try to do them all, but we'll see how we go. So first question, Wael, how can we shift towards using new sustainable materials in place of the current standard building materials? So
good question. I think this is, it's a joint effort. Yeah, it's a joint effort that starts with wanting or understanding that we are responsible. There should be an acknowledgement of responsibility. And once we acknowledge that responsibility, we have to join forces with government agencies, with the suppliers, with all these, with the laboratories, the chemistry laboratories, whatever, they are the industry, to create conversations. And this is how things start to change. I mean, you need legislation, you need real government support. And we are blessed that the National Pavilion stands by us in this fundamental, in this difficult moment where, man and planet are really at extreme tension with one another, and we need to act. And if we don't act, it's going to be too late.
Yes. Okay, so while I'm going to join two questions because I think they're close to each other. So how durable are building materials made of the salt that you were saying? And where can we learn more about the Sabkha research? I mean, I combined these two because I felt they're close to each other. So please tell us.
Yeah, okay. The durability of the MgO cement that we're working on is actually the equivalent of Portland cement. It's no difference. It's an insoluble cement. It's studied in the laboratories. I mean, the only disadvantage of that cement is actually it absorbs CO2 in order to gain structural strength. So that's such a great thing that, I absorb CO2, but that is also a disadvantage because the technology today only is allowing us to produce it as precast units, not as cast in situ. But still, this research is still very early on. Things still need 5-10 years of research to reach where they are. They don't happen in 6, 7, 8 months.
Correct.
So it will get there. I have extreme faith it will get there. But today it is an insoluble structure equivalent in strength to Portland cement, no doubt. That is, The second part that you asked was, can you remind me?
Where can we learn about the Sabkha research? Yeah. More. We want to learn more. Yeah.
There will be more information. Unfortunately, I cannot disclose much information before next year and before there's a whole plan of communications and things like that. So all this research is going to be out there for everyone to have access to at some point. But it just needs some patience because the Biennale was scheduled for May 2020. Today it's postponed to May 2021. So once we need those, and then everything will be everywhere. We might have them online even to allow full accessibility for everyone, for sure.
Okay, so there's still, I'm not sure I'll be able to say all the questions, but there's one saying that is sustainable architecture the same as green architecture? I don't know, maybe this question of nature or organic, I don't know. So do you have any insight on that?
Sustainable green, I mean, there's a lot of terminologies, but again, each context defines a certain situation. Green today doesn't mean green. I think whoever is asking the question, it doesn't mean green is a tree. Green architecture, again, can mean just sustainable way of thinking, where you're pro-environment, where the green starts to represent planet Earth in a way. And I think it's all in the same line. It's under one umbrella, honestly.
Okay, so maybe one more minute for the question, and then I'll have to go for the closing notes. So isn't creating movable building structure contribute in creating bad emissions, as the equipment required to move the building structure require lots of fuel and energy? What's your take on that?
True and not true. It's it's a great question, because this is something that I'd like to end on also. It's very important that, we understand what are the real things that are causing the problems. Yeah. Today, they make we have become to believe that if all of us ride our bicycles to work, the planet will be in good health. That's not true. The construction industry alone creates 40% of pollution. I mean, if we all ride our bicycles, I think we are only going to contribute to 1% or 2%. Yeah, it's not about that. It's about inert material. It's about creating these materials. That's true. Moving these things, the car might have had some emissions, these trucks to lay out these containers, but the emission of building columns and pads with cement, 1 ton equals 1 ton of CO2. So if we do a simple calculation methodology, probably the emission from those cars is actually nothing in comparison to the emission of creating for the quantity of CO2 that would have been released to produce the cement required for the project. So we have to be, we have to really know if we want a real change today, we really have to be very conscious of where the problems lie. And the government, industry tricks us. They want to sell, they want to sell advertisement, all of that. They want to sell. They will not tell you where the real problem lies. You have to look for it. You have to do your research. You have to do your homework, and then you can understand which is better which is the better decision to make. Right.
So what do you think our audience should take away from this interesting talk at the end? I mean, just one word or two, very small sentence before we close. This is it. So what do you want to tell them? Lastly.
I think, what I'd like to say is that we need to re-question. We need to create fundamental change and a real change. We need to go back to zero and re-question, where did we go wrong? It's not about recycling only. Recycling is that acknowledging we have a huge problem today. Let's fix it by recycling these materials. No, we have to go back, reassess our materials, and move forward, hopefully with these materials not even having to recycle them, because they go back into the earth without any impact or without any damage. And that is very important.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you, Wael, for this insightful and informative talk. I'm looking forward to visit the pavilion, by the way, in Venice next year. Of course, we invite everyone to do that. Thank you all for tuning in, and please make sure, to attend next week talk at the same time. Thank you, Wael.